Follow along, Catholic Pilgrims, as we follow French doctor of the Church, St. Francis de Sales, through his book, Introduction to the Devout Life. Tune in as we read through this practical guide for living out the Catholic faith well. Welcome, Catholic Pilgrims. Including today's reading, we only have 25 readings left from this book. Isn't that crazy? We will be done before we know it, but it's been wonderful having this time to get to know St. Francis and learn from him. So, with 25 readings left, we still have much to learn, and today is the last day where St. Francis will be focusing on temptations, and it's another short reading. So let's open our books to chapter 10 of the fourth part. Chapter 10, How to Arm the Heart Against Temptation. From time to time, examine what passions predominate in your soul, and having ascertained them, let your way of life be altogether opposed to them in thought, word, and deed. For instance, if you know that you have a tendency to vanity, often reflect on the misery of our present life, how these vanities will weigh upon your conscience on your deathbed, how unworthy they are of a noble heart, that they are but a childish trifling, and so forth. Often speak in opposition to your vanity and despise it, however reluctantly, thus making yourself, as it were, its enemy. For by dint of opposing anything, we gradually learn to hate it, although we may have begun by loving it. Perform as many acts of abjection and humility as you can, in spite of your reluctance. For by this means you will weaken your vanity and strengthen your humility, so that when temptation arises, your inclination will be less favorable to it, and you will have more power to resist it. If you are disposed to avarice, often reflect on the folly of this sin, which makes us the slave of that which is destined only to be our servant. Remember that when death comes, you must forsake all, and leave your riches in the hands of those who will squander them or abuse them to their own ruin and damnation, and so forth. Condemn avarice and be warm in praises of the opposing virtue. Exert yourself to be generous in almsgiving and charity, and in occasionally forbearing to seize occasions of gain. If you are inclined to trifle with the affections, either exciting or being excited with love, reflect how dangerous an amusement this is, both to yourself and others. How unworthy a thing it is thus to trifle with and profane the noblest affections of the soul, and how it leads to excessive levity of mind. Cultivate purity and simplicity of heart, and conform your actions to such a temper, avoiding all affectations and flirtations. Finally, in time of peace, that is when you are not under the pressure of those temptations to which you are most subject, carefully practice the opposite virtue. And if occasions do not present themselves, go out of your way to seek them, and thus you will strengthen your heart against further temptation. I know that my biggest vices that I struggle with are pride, vanity, and anger. Those are my main three. There was a time in my life when I would never have admitted to struggling with these. I would have said something like, "Oh, sure, I'm a sinner, just like all the rest of us." But I wouldn't have acknowledged the specific areas that I struggle against. In fact, because I was unwilling to say the sins out loud, I didn't even really acknowledge that I had these sins as problems, and so I actually didn't really struggle against them. I just constantly conceded to the temptations. And this is all about self-preservation. We don't want to see ourselves as being not the best person ever. And this is one of the reasons that confession is so important. It forces us to face ourselves. You cannot fix what you refuse to acknowledge. St. Francis says, quote, "From time to time, examine what passions predominate in your soul, and having ascertained them, let your way of life be altogether opposed to them in thought, word, and deed." Unquote. Now that I'm Catholic and go to confession, I am required to face my biggest pitfalls. And because I am now aware of them and acknowledge them, it does help me to arm myself against temptations in those areas. I know what situations cause me to be prideful. And so when I sense a situation where I'm liable to be prideful coming on, I have steps that I can take to back away from those temptations. The same with vanity and anger. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect at dealing with these things, but I'm a far cry better than I once was when I wouldn't even acknowledge that these were areas that were issues for me. So definitely take St. Francis's advice and think about where you struggle the most. Is it gluttony, greed, envy, lust? Whatever it is, be honest with yourself. God already knows what you struggle with. So be honest with yourself, because then and only then can you actively work to arm against temptations. That is all for today, Catholic Pilgrims. Next time we will be reading about anxiety. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.